Radio Row, you get great guests. They pop in, and you get lucky enough to sit down with them. You guys, now of course, Randy, I'm extremely familiar with your work, diehard football fan, and you, sir, Chris Nowinski, everyone's familiar with your work now. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing here.
Well, I'm really honored to be joined by Randy Cross. So, we've been doing this now for 10 years. And, one of the great things we've realized in advancing the entire concussion and CTE issue is brain donation. Everything we've learned is from the 385 brains that have now been donated to our brain bank in the Concussion Legacy Foundation in collaboration with Boston University and the VA. So this month we just said, let's do a brain pledge month, and let's see if we can get some real great famous athletes to pledge their brain. And I met Randy, and Randy was the first guy to jump in. And so Randy said, let's go to Radio Row and let's talk about it. So I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic cause. It's something that's always been kind of close to my heart. I wrote I guess in Hollywood they'd call them treatments, only because it's a short book, and it's purely fictional. Several years ago, about 10 years ago, just as I got motivated about it, because of sort of the personal nature of what this is. And I've been saying the whole time, although today, it's all about the guys that are playing now and the young kids that are playing now, and everybody in the future, as this research gets more and more in tune and can figure out what this thing is, really. Guys can make informed decisions. It's not like it's not going to be football, but not completely unlike when I was a kid, and Chris will remember those days with boxing. And,
yep.
It was, he's just punch drunk.
Right.
And that's the brain. But why aren't all boxers like that? They never really bothered to figure that out. Well, that's something that needs to be figured out for them and also for football players and hockey players and everybody else.
Randy, it's a heck of a donation. Like, I've given money, I've donated clothes. Donating your brain.
I do get to keep it,
Well, yeah, until you're done with it, but still, isn't there kind of like a finality to you when you make that decision? Like,
yeah.
Well,
I also, for instance, on my license, I'm an organ donor.
Okay.
So it's to me, it's the same kind of decision. You're gonna save a life potentially by donating organs, and maybe. By the time I die, let's say I die at 90 years old and I show no signs of CTE or any kinds of problems, a brain like that is going to be just as valuable as a brain of a guy that had it bad at a certain age, I got to think.
But because as a lineman, if you don't have it, why don't you have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
What was it about me? Why didn't I? And I've got plenty of former teammates that have struggled. I've got former teammates that have had really bad issues. They've had brain shunts and all sorts of other stuff. And it's just something that a long time ago motivated. But, I followed Chris pretty closely online on Twitter and stuff with the stuff that he does. And it just seems perfect.
Randy Cross, Chris Nowinski joining us. And Chris, I remember watching the movie Concussion last year. And I thought I know Dr. Amalu's story. But you still were the first person who I thought of when it comes to CT, because your background is a WWE wrestler, but a Harvard grad. Are you the first one who actually kind of dove into this and said, this is a problem we really have to get after?
Well, I might have been one of the first to recognize how we were going to change things. So Dr. Amalu did the first two cases, Mike Webster and Terry Long, and he published them in the Journal of Neurosurgery while I was writing my book. And I found them, and CT was not, I didn't think about it when I thought of concussion when I was injured from WWE. And I realized, this is a whole different angle, but I think part of the reason concussions has been remaining under the radar is because it's an invisible injury. And with CT, you can actually see the damage. And so after my book came out, about a month afterwards, Andre Waters took his life. And I guess my bright idea was, if we're going to get answers on CT, we need to get them faster. And so when Dr. Amalu studied those two guys, they had died in Allegheny County where he was a medical examiner, and it was one every 3 years. And so I started making calls, and Andre Waters was the first, Justin Strelzik, Chris Benoit's family, So now last year we had 91 brains donated because we've created this whole thing about, hey, let's go get them and let's go get the answers. And so, I'm proud that that's happened, and that, now we have the evidence that can't be disputed, that 91 out of 95 guys who we've studied who played in the NFL have had this disease. And it's been at least 10% of those guys who've died in the last 5 years have donated. So we know this is a really widespread issue.
Now, here's my question, and I'm not a Harvard guy. I didn't play in the NFL, so I'm a little slower on it. Is there ever going to be a way to detect CTE before someone passes away?
Absolutely, and we're getting very close. Part of the awareness raising that's been great is that the government's now funding this, right? So there's money from the National Institutes of Health, from the VA, from the Department of Defense, and we're working on things. One of the things we're going to be publishing a lot on this year is that there's a PET scan that can be specific for the damaged proteins that we see as CT. There's a blood test. You can actually start to pick them up in various ways. You can look at blood, cerebral spinal, you get a spinal tap, and your cerebral spinal fluid will show some issues. We're going to be able to put that all together and create a nice recipe for, 90% chance you have it, or you don't have to worry about it. And once we have that unlocks big pharma to say we can develop drugs and we can measure their impacts. We have something to measure.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of when I started studying this more in depth. Was, man, why isn't there a litmus test or a sideline blood test? Guy gets dinged, you take a sample. I mean, the more I read about, the release of tau proteins and all that in your brain, of course, then I had to read more about the blood-brain barrier because that's why it didn't get across.
You know your stuff.
But ideally, there's going to come a time when there can be a sideline test where a guy, let's say a Matt Moore, the quarterback from Miami, gets obliterated like that.
The hardest hit of the year.
A play later, he's on the field.
Right. You don't need a test for that.
That is so irresponsible. But even having said that, to be able to say, almost like a blood sugar test, if they can get to the point where you can test that and there's a presence and a certain concentration, it's not safe. That guy doesn't see the field, not that day. He doesn't play for a while until those levels go down.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. Randy Cross, Chris Nowinski with us right here on 104.5 The Team. I know you guys have got interviews stacked up, but I got to ask you this question. You're Crusaders for Brain Health. Do you still enjoy watching football?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the game. And I've got no delusions on it gave me the majority of what I have is because I played football. That and I was, so overabundantly full of garbage. But, I think it's got to change, though. It's changed some, but, it'll never be safe. Anybody that thinks you can make football safe, but football's got to be a age-specific sport.
Okay.
You shouldn't play football before, when you're going through puberty, you get to about 9th grade, that should be when you start playing football. You got no business, and I know it's not a popular thing here in the state of Texas or other places, but you have no business on a football field as a 6-year-old, looking like a little bobblehead toy, running around, falling down, doing that. That, to me, is ludicrous, and if nothing else, if we can get to the point the NFL's got a flag football program, if we can funnel everybody that's trying to play football at a young age into that, right on. I think that's perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect. I would just add, it's harder for me because one of the things, we talk about numbers with CTE, but we get to know their families. And CTE, destroys the frontal lobe and then goes into areas that control memory and emotion. And some guys turn into legitimate monsters, violence, strange behaviors. It's really hard on the family. And so I watch football, I support the players, I advocate for the players. But until we are honest about that, and until we put in things like they shouldn't play as kids, and therefore the risk of CT lifetime will go way down, until we do those things, it's hard for me to watch the system and the business of football and say this is all great, because the families don't know and the players don't necessarily know what's coming in the future.
Wow, this is heavy. This is one of my favorite interviews today. I got to tell you, it's heavy hitting. I learned a lot. Randy Cross, Chris Nowinski, we appreciate you. Thanks for spending some time with us.